Known for his transgressive lyrics and experimental songwriting, Lou Reed's artistic reputation propped up a life of darkness, debauchery, and depression. In 1989, Rolling Stone asked the legendary rocker to do an important interview for them. Reed enthusiastically agreed, but when he sent them the transcript, they were so horrified by what they read, they refused to publish it. Born March 2, 1942 in Brooklyn, to a father that he described as overbearing, controlling, and tyrannical, Lou would often disregard his father's household rules. Lou's sister, however, recounted that the younger Reed was just as tyrannical as his father, often acting out and throwing tantrums when he didn't get his way. It was something of a contrast to his early high school persona. In a surprising twist, Lou Reed joined a doo-wop band in high school, later claiming that the wholesome genre was his first musical love. Already a competent musician, Reed recorded a doo-wop song with his band, The Shades, on which he played guitar and sang. He was clearly talented, but there was a tragic side to him even then. Reed's sister painted a picture of a difficult teenage life for her brother. According to her, the young Lou suffered from social anxiety. He would often withdraw in social situations, and he spent most of his time locked in his room and even began suffering from panic attacks. Because of these struggles, Lou would soon find comfort in all the wrong places. By age 16, Lou Reed had begun experimenting with illicit substances, a habit that would characterize most of his adult life and persona too. He refused to listen to his parents when they voiced their concerns, and the only other place he found solace was in music, but music couldn't save him from an oncoming crisis. After graduating high school, Lou Reed got into NYU to study poetry. But a short time into his first year, tragedy struck. Reed suffered a mental breakdown. His parents took him home in a catatonic state. Desperate, they sought the help of a psychiatrist who recommended he undergo electroconvulsive therapy, but his parents may have had ulterior motives. Reed has claimed that his parents chose electroshock therapy not for his mental health, but instead as a way to treat his homosexual feelings. His bedroom life has been the topic of some debate, but either way, Lou would resent his parents for subjecting him to that treatment for the rest of his life, especially since it didn't even help him. At his parents' insistence to straighten out, Reed joined the Army Reserves next, but he quickly grew tired of the obligation, wanting out of the commitment. He decided that he would exit in true Lou Reed fashion. He held a reportedly unloaded weapon to the head of his commanding officer, which resulted in his expulsion from the reserves. This left Reed with time to pursue his true passions. In 1964, Reed moved to New York and began working as an in-house songwriter for a small record label. There, he met a group of session musicians with whom he would form the Velvet Underground. The band quickly gained notoriety in the New York music scene for their challenging sound and energetic live shows. They soon attracted the attention of Andy Warhol, who became their manager. At Warhol's insistence, the band added a female nightclub singer to their lineup, in the form of a German model and singer named Nico. Reed was initially resistant to this idea, but soon found Nico to be a fitting collaborator, until he took their relationship to another level. The two began a brief affair, and while it didn't last long, Reed would find enough time to terrorize the young singer. Reed and Nico's relationship was largely characterized by his dismissive and often downright abusive behavior towards her, brought on by his opinion that she was unnecessary, redundant, useless in the Velvet's lineup. Nico began a residency of shows at a bar in the East Village in 1966, however. Reed prohibited any of the other members of the band from performing with her. Multi-instrumentalist Velvet Underground band member John Cale described Reed and Nico's affair as consummated and constipated. Their squabbles would often disrupt rehearsal sessions, and in the studio, Reed would insist that Nico do countless takes of her vocal recordings until she got it right. He was so persistent that she often broke down in tears. Despite this, the band's musical output would reverberate for decades to come. The Velvet Underground and Nico, the group's eponymous debut album, was released March 1967, and though it made little impact at the time, the album has since gained a reputation as one of the greatest albums of all time. Renowned producer Brian Eno has hyperbolically stated that while the album only sold a poor of 30,000 copies during its first 5 years, everyone who bought one of those 30,000 copies started a band, illustrating the record's enormous influence. But before the influence was evident, the band had already begun to implode, and Reed played a major role in their downfall. Andy Warhol was seen as largely responsible for the Velvet Underground's success, though limited, and the band appreciated his presence, since it got them the attention they may not otherwise have received. However, his presence began to grate on the band members, particularly Reed. The singer recounted one instance where Warhol asked him how many songs he'd written that day, and when Reed responded 10, Andy scoffed, "You are so lazy, you should have written 15. Eventually, Warhol's constant meddling culminated in a huge blow-up. During a tense meeting between the two men, Warhol questioned Reed on his vision for the band's future, and as soon as it became apparent to Reed that he and his manager did not share the same vision, he fired Warhol on the spot without consulting any of the other members. Warhol was livid. Reed claims he had never seen Warhol angry until that day. Warhol allegedly called him a rat, which in Reed's opinion was the worst thing he could think of. But Warhol's departure was not the last. Nico began to receive the lion's share of the attention among the other members of the Velvet Underground, and that infuriated Reed. He felt like she was encroaching on a project that he saw himself as the rightful leader of. He claims that he discovered her name would be on their first album at the same moment the public did, after it was released. His petty jealousy had dire effects. Nico eventually quit the band. By the time the Velvet Underground began to record their second album, which was only less than a year after their first had come out, the band was in rough shape. John Cale had objected to the departures of both Nico and Warhol, which caused tensions within the band, but things would only get worse. Their second album was a commercial failure, and this brought the band's internal strife to a breaking point. Reed finally decided he wanted Cale out of the band. His reasons are unknown, though many suspect there was a power struggle within the band between the two men, so Reed gave the other members an ultimatum: him or Cale. Cale got the axe, later stating his relationship with Reed was a non-sexual love affair that ran its course. Conflict continued to plague the Velvet Underground throughout the remainder of the 60s. They released 2 more albums, in 69 and 70, and yet Reed ultimately decided to quit the band in 1970, frustrated with their lack of mainstream success and with the toll it was taking on his body. But his next move was surprising. Despite his rebellious personality, Reed moved back to his parents at their Long Island home. There he got a job as a typist in his father's accounting firm. But the music industry wasn't done with him yet. RCA Records approached Reed in 1971 and asked him to make a comeback solo album, to which he agreed. However, much like the Velvet Underground's first album, his self-titled debut did not make a splash commercially or critically. Reed knew his next move had to be his biggest, and so he enlisted the help of a rock god. One of Reed's fans was the rising star David Bowie, who bestowed upon Reed the title King of New York. Now, Bowie was a huge fan of Reed, so he didn't hesitate to agree when Lou asked him to produce his sophomore solo album. The resulting record, Transformer, was a smash hit. Its single, Walk on the Wild Side, catapulted Reed into mainstream and critical acclaim, but his relationship with Bowie didn't last. After one late-night meeting where Reed, likely not completely sober, got into an argument with Bowie, their relationship took a disturbing turn. Reed ended up hitting Bowie, Bowie allegedly told Reed that if they wanted to work together again, Reed would have to clean up his act. The two would later reconcile before Bowie's 50th birthday, but his behavior at the time of their falling out was typical for Reed. Reed gained reputation in the 1970s for associating with people considered undesirable by polite society. He delighted in exposing his more sheltered acquaintances to this seedy underbelly. He once brought record executive Clive Davis for an after-dark walk on the wild side through New York's infamous meat-packing district, which at the time was rife with addicts, call girls, and criminals. Davis was horrified. In the midst of these struggles, Reed fell in love and got married to Betty Kronstad in 1973. Kronstad was hesitant about Reed at first, but she eventually fell for the singer. She was a firm believer in his talent and his potential, but that wasn't enough to overtake Reed's dark side. Reed hadn't changed, and her accounts of their marriage paint a horrific picture of substance abuse-fueled conflict. She claims that on a U.S. tour, his substance issues made him violent, and that the second time he hit her, he gave her a black eye. She boldly claimed that after this beating, "I gave him a black eye too," and that stopped him from using his fists. The stress of their marriage became too much to handle. Kronstad flew to the Dominican Republic to make use of a law there that allowed a 24-hour divorce. This was a wake-up call for Reed. He agreed to move out of their apartment to give Kronstad space. But one night, she received a surprising phone call. It was Reed, and he wanted her to join him at one of their favorite restaurants in New York. He informed Kronstad that he had given up all vices, and then he pleaded with her to take him back. And so the two decided to give it another go, but sadly, old habits die hard. Not long after moving back in together, Reed fell to his temptations once again, and this time they took on more concerning proportions. Kronstad recounted how one morning at 8:30 a.m., she arrived downstairs to find Reed inebriated out of his mind, having consumed a full bottle of Johnny Walker Red. This was unusual, even for Reed, since he normally would only start drinking in the afternoon. Reed had been writing songs for his third solo effort, an album he would title Berlin. The album told the story of a fictional married couple whose relationship was disintegrating. In the lyrics, Reed drew heavily on the troubles facing his marriage. The morning she found him wasted, Reed had completed the album and insisted on playing it in full for her. But Kronstad immediately recognized that all of their dirty laundry was being aired, and she was horrified that it would soon be public. In a song entitled The Kids, Reed described a mother who struggled with addiction that forced her to sell her body and give up her children. But when Kronstad listened to it, it became clear to her that Reed had adapted these lyrics from her own late mother's story, since she had faced similar struggles. The insulting way in which Reed spoke of this character in his lyrics devastated his wife. However, she was not the only woman that Reed took lyrical liberties with. Reed didn't focus solely on his marriage when composing the lyrics for Berlin. Rather, the album and its female characters represented a combination of all the women Reed had ever had a close relationship with, including Nico. As to why he chose to name his album after the German capital, he later explained, "I love the idea of a divided city," and at the time, Berlin was still split between East and West Germany, and so he chose the title as a metaphorical representation of a divided marriage. Berlin was released in July of 1973, and like a significant number of Reed's releases, it was initially rejected by the music press. Rolling Stone called it a disaster and criticized its degenerate lyrical content, even going so far as to declare Reed's career over. Reed grew deeply disheartened at the album's poor reception, having poured so much of his soul into its composition. He spoke publicly about Berlin, rejecting opinions that the taboo subjects covered in the lyrics were inappropriate. He defended his writing as being about real life in all its sordid glory. He dismissed critics who morally objected to the record, stating, The guy in Berlin beats up his girlfriend. Is that a guide to what you can do? I don't think so. They should sticker my albums and say, "Stay away if you have no moral compass." Despite his bold defense of the album, its poor reception crushed him. Shortly after its release, he no longer wanted to listen to it, and he refused to discuss it. A friend claimed that when he did listen to it, he would tear up. Reed himself stated that in writing the album, he had gone as deep as he wanted to go for his own mental health. Andy Warhol passed away in 1987, and Reed attended the funeral where he reunited with the members of his former band, the Velvet Underground. The loss of their mutual friend and former manager, and the emotions around their reconnection, inspired the Velvet Underground to reunite in 1990 with the original lineup, minus Nico, who had passed away in 1988. The Velvet Underground roared back to life with a highly successful European tour in the summer of 1993, climaxing in an acclaimed performance at the Glastonbury Festival. But old grudges soon resurfaced. Lou Reed still felt that it was his band, not Cale's. A resulting dispute between the two led them to scrap the upcoming tour, and they disbanded once again. And that's when Reed's life took another turn. In 1989, the communist government of Czechoslovakia was toppled, and a writer and activist named Václav Havel was elected president of the new liberal regime. Havel had commented in several interviews that he greatly admired Lou Reed as a songwriter, and that the Velvet Underground's debut album had inspired him to pursue political office. Shortly after Havel's electoral victory, Rolling Stone approached Reed and asked him to interview the Czech president. Reed, flattered by the consideration, enthusiastically agreed to this assignment, but what he did shocked Rolling Stone. When the editors of Rolling Stone eventually received Reed's transcript of the interview, they were horrified. It was clear that Reed had taken this assignment as one giant stroke of his ego. He repeatedly steered the conversation away from any political points Havel tried to make toward himself and the significance of his music. He even distilled Havel's points into reductive statements like, "Music can change the world." Rolling Stone declined to publish the interview, which greatly offended Reed. In October 2011, Lou Reed released a collaborative album with popular metal band Metallica. Entitled Lulu, the album was immediately met with widespread disdain among critics and fans alike. One reviewer summed it up: "Lulu is a catastrophic failure on almost every level, a project that could quite possibly do irreparable harm to Metallica's career." Perhaps Reed's physical deterioration contributed to the album's baffling release. As the 2010s began, Reed's health began to deteriorate. His years of substance abuse had taken a toll on his body, and on top of that, he suffered from hepatitis and diabetes. He soon developed liver cancer and underwent an organ transplant in 2013. Despite commenting afterward that he was feeling stronger than ever, his body betrayed him. The transplant Reed had received did not take, and so on October 27, 2013, he succumbed to liver disease at the age of 71. His widow described his final days as peaceful, and Reed received an astounding number of tributes from both inside and outside the music industry, showing how his music and influence had touched countless lives. Since his passing, there have been concerning allegations made against Reed. One biographer alleged a history of harmful and misogynistic behavior towards women in his life. Others have reported Reed using prejudiced slurs, while others still have accused him of projecting an obnoxious public persona just to sell records. Grappling with Reed has always meant grappling with a legacy that is frightening, brilliant, and troubling.